What if I told you that the global economy isn't as unpredictable as it looks? That beneath the headlines, the crises, the political fights, there's a quiet rhythm that has repeated itself for more than 2,000 years? A rhythm so precise that empires, kings, and modern superpowers have all collapsed by following the same mathematical script, often without even realizing it. This isn't a prophecy. It's a pattern, one written in ancient ledgers, royal archives, and modern financial databases. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Because according to the numbers, we're already in the danger zone. Let's begin. What if I told you that every major economic collapse in world history, every empire that crumbled, every financial system that imploded, followed the same six-step chain reaction? Not similar trends, not vague comparisons. The exact same mathematical sequence, repeating with the precision of a clock. Rome in 476. France in 1789. Weimar Germany in 1923. The United States in 1929. Argentina in 2001. Civilizations separated by oceans, eras, languages, and cultures. Yet their collapses unfolded almost word for word from the same script. And here's the part that should make your stomach tighten. We are currently sitting in stage 3. Let that sink in. This isn't a theory about what might happen. This is a documented pattern that has already played out 5 times in modern history. And based on the numbers, we've moved into the exact stage where every previous civilization entered an economic spiral they could no longer escape. Historically, the time between stage 3 and the final reset isn't decades. It's 24 to 36 months. Not years, months. Now you might be thinking, this sounds dramatic. Maybe a bit conspiratorial. But economic patterns don't care about our politics or opinions. They're not emotional, they're mathematical. And the math today looks identical to the math recorded in every empire's ledgers right before the breaking point. So let me show you the mechanism. Once you understand it, you'll start recognizing it everywhere. The cycle always begins the same way, what economists politely call easy credit. This is the moment a civilization realizes it can create money faster than it creates real productivity. Rome mixed cheaper metals into its silver coins. 18th century France printed paper money backed by land no one had measured. The 1920s introduced margin loans and installment buying. The 2010s created 0% interest rates and quantitative easing. Stage 1 always feels like prosperity. Suddenly, people can afford things their parents never dreamed of. Companies explode in size. Asset prices rocket. It feels like a new economic era where old rules simply don't apply. Between 2010 and 2021, US debt jumped 89%, while GDP grew just 42%. We weren't expanding value, we were expanding credit. And here's the seductive part. Stage 1 genuinely works. For a while. Real businesses grow. Real jobs appear. Wealth piles up, at least on paper. Then the system reaches its first breaking point, debt saturation. This is the moment when adding more debt stops producing real growth. Think of it like your personal finances. If you have no debt and take a cheap loan, you might start a business or buy a home, your total wealth expands. But if you already owe $200,000 and borrow another $50,000, that new loan goes toward keeping the old debt alive. No new value. Just more burden. The Bank for International Settlements identified the threshold. When total debt rises above roughly 90% of GDP, additional borrowing starts shrinking the economy. We crossed that line in 2010. Today the US federal debt to GDP ratio is 123%, and if you count corporations, households, and the financial sector, the total climbs to over 350%. Stage 2 creates a trap that leads directly to stage 3. When everyone is drowning in debt, they stop spending on growth and start spending on interest. You feel it in your own budget. Instead of upgrading your life, you make minimum payments. Businesses do the same, they refinance instead of expanding. The economy doesn't crash here, but it stops moving. US productivity growth has averaged just 1.1% since 2010, half the rate of the previous 30 years. And here's the mathematical nightmare. When an economy stops growing but debt keeps compounding, you enter the interest trap. Imagine making $50,000 a year while owing $100,000 at 5% interest. You pay $5,000 a year, manageable. But if your income stays flat and your debt grows to $200,000, you owe $10,000. At $500,000, you're paying $25,000, half your income, just to stand still. That's where the US is right now. In 2024, America paid $892 billion in interest on its national debt. That same year, the economy grew by about $900 billion. Meaning nearly 100% of our growth is being swallowed by interest on past spending. This is the mathematical point of no return that precedes every historical reset. At this stage, you can't tax your way out, you need to seize all economic growth. You can't grow your way out, creditors absorb every dollar of expansion. And you can't inflate your way out without triggering the next stage. When a household reaches this point, it defaults or restructures. Governments have the same three choices but with different names: hyperinflation, debt jubilee, or war. This is where governments panic and reach for drastic measures. 1788 France tried taxing nobles, sparked a revolution. 1922 Weimar Germany printed money, destroyed its currency. 1929 America did nothing, triggered the Great Depression. 2001 Argentina froze bank accounts, caused riots. Harvard's Carmen Reinhart studied 70 sovereign debt crises since 1800. Here's the brutal finding. 0% were solved peacefully. Every crisis involved either inflation over 20%, restructuring that wiped out creditors, or conflict. Not one country simply grew out of it. So ask yourself, if you knew a major financial event was mathematically guaranteed within 36 months, would you keep your money where it is today? Because the Treasury's own data shows we've crossed the threshold that triggers the remaining stages. Currency debasement. Social fragmentation. Final reset. Every civilization that reached stage 3 eventually reached stage 6. Not most all. The timing changes. The sequence never does. If we are in stage 3 today and the math says we are, what do the next 3 stages mean for your savings, your investments, your retirement? If you think governments will figure it out, look at history. 5 civilizations made the same assumption. 5 were wrong. But here's the advantage you have that they didn't. You know the pattern. They didn't. The real question is, what will you do with that knowledge? Let me show you something that will make the pattern unmistakable. In 1922, the Dow sat at 63. 7 years later, it hit 381, a 505% jump. Margin debt exploded to 13% of GDP. Consumer credit soared. The Fed kept interest rates low to help Europe recover. Now compare that to us. In 2009, the S&P bottomed at 676. By January 2022, it reached 4,796, a 609% rise. Margin debt hit the same 13% of GDP. Corporate and consumer debt hit all-time highs. The Fed kept rates at 0 for 7 years and injected $4.5 trillion into the system. These aren't loose parallels. They're nearly carbon copies. Even the public mood matched. Irving Fisher in 1928 said markets had reached a permanently high plateau. In 2021, Cathie Wood predicted the S&P would hit 15,000. And remember how 2020-2021 felt like everyone was getting rich? Meme stocks, crypto, real estate. Everything was going up. That feeling isn't prosperity, it's stage 1 spilling into stage 2. Historians call it the illusion of wealth, and it appears before every collapse. 1788 France experienced the same thing, lavish estates, thriving lifestyles, while the Treasury went bankrupt behind the scenes. The Fed found that U.S. household net worth increased $33 trillion from 2019 to 2021, the fastest in history. But we didn't create $33 trillion of real goods. We created dollars. Those dollars chased assets, driving prices sky high. The most extreme example? Weimar Germany. After World War I, Germany owed more than its whole economy produced. Their options were the same as ours today: default, restructure, or inflate. They chose to print. And for a brief moment it looked like a miracle. Factories reopened. Unemployment fell. People had cash again. Even production rose from 1919 to 1921. But underneath the surface, the foundation was cracking. Stage 3 is the warning siren, the moment when the economy stops expanding but the debt doesn't. Stage 4 is when the system stops pretending. It's the phase where governments abandon conventional tools and reach for the one lever they still control, the currency itself. Every empire that reached stage 4 reacted the same way, They printed, diluted, expanded, or manipulated the currency in desperate hope of outrunning the interest burden. Rome clipped its coins. France issued assignats backed by land they couldn't sell. Weimar Germany turned printing presses into factories. The United States ran massive deficit spending and monetization during the 1970s. And now we stand at the threshold of the same decision. But here's the truth no official will say out loud. Printing doesn't solve the debt, printing destroys the denominator used to measure it. When stage 4 begins, the laws of arithmetic take control. Politicians frame it as stimulus, quantitative support, modern monetary theory, or emergency measures, but the outcome is always the same. The currency loses credibility before it loses value. The public loses trust first. Prices rise next. Stage 4 feels good at the start. Asset prices rise, wages jump, unemployment falls. The middle class, still unaware of the invisible tax they are paying, believes the crisis has passed. But it hasn't. The crisis has merely changed shape. Because as soon as a government starts debasing its currency to survive, it sets off the second domino. Social fracture. No empire collapses financially before collapsing socially. The moment people understand their savings by less, their wages fall behind inflation, and their government is quietly devaluing the money they worked decades to earn, something fundamental breaks. Trust. You start to see the symptoms. Rising political polarization. Extremism gaining momentum. Protests over prices, housing, food, fuel. Hostility toward institutions. The wealthy pulling ahead while the middle class falls behind. A breakdown of social cohesion. Generational resentment. Capital flight. A surge in alternative assets. A rush to transfer wealth out of the traditional system. France saw this in 1788. Food riots and political rage fueled the revolutionary climate. Rome saw decades of internal conflict before the currency collapse. Weimar Germany experienced street battles between political factions long before the mark died. Argentina's middle class turned on its own government as banks froze their accounts. Social fracture always happens in stage 5 for the same reason. People will endure hardship, but they will not endure perceived injustice. When the public realizes the system is mathematically doomed and their leaders are pretending otherwise, anger replaces patience. Fear replaces confidence. And at that exact moment, the wealth transfer begins. Those who understand the pattern quietly move their savings into assets that survive resets. Those who don't cling to the system that is quietly dissolving beneath them. Stage 5 is the most dangerous part of the cycle, not because the collapse has happened but because people finally understand that it will. And when enough citizens realize the math can't be fixed, the final stage becomes inevitable. Stage 6 is not a moment. It's a transition, a snap, an irreversible pivot where the old financial architecture fails and a new one emerges. But every reset throughout history shares the same features. 1. The currency changes form. Sometimes it's replaced directly, like Argentina's peso freeze or the German mark giving way to the Rentenmark. Sometimes it's redefined, like the US confiscation of gold in 1933 or the abandonment of the gold standard in 1971. Sometimes it's redenominated, like Brazil's endless currency swaps. But the old unit of value never survives intact. Never. 2. Debts are wiped out along with savings. Defaults, devaluations, bank holidays, restructuring agreements, different costumes, same outcome. Creditors lose. Savers lose. Paper promises evaporate. 3. Political systems are reshaped. Resets always come with new rules, new leadership, or new political realities. Money changes, laws change, power structures change. 4. Hard assets reprice violently. Resources, land, energy, precious metals, infrastructure, anything tied to real-world value gets revalued upward in the new system because the currency loses its anchor. 5. A new monetary order begins. Rome shifted from silver to gold. France moved from assignats to metal-backed franc. Weimar moved to the Rentenmark. The US moved from gold-backed to fiat. Argentina restructured its entire financial regime. The reset is not the end, it's the reset because something new takes the old system's place. If we are in stage 3 now, and the math says we are, then stage 4 is the next step, followed by stage 5 social unraveling and stage 6 monetary transition. The timeline historically is tight. 24 to 36 months from entering stage 3 to reaching stage 6. That places the window for the reset between late 2026 and mid-2027. And here's the part you must understand. You can't stop the cycle, but you can choose which side of it you land on. Because every reset in history created two groups. Group A, those who reacted too late. They trusted the system. They believed the warnings were exaggerated. They kept their wealth and assets tied to the collapsing currency. They were wiped out. Group B, those who understood the pattern. They moved into hard assets early. They positioned themselves before the panic. They protected their purchasing power. They emerged from the reset not weakened but stronger. We are now in the narrowing corridor between stage 3 and stage 4, where the decisions you make matter more than at any other point in your financial life. The pattern is unfolding. The mathematics are accelerating. And history is repeating itself with unnerving precision. The only remaining question is the one every civilization eventually faces. Now that you know the sequence, what will you do before the reset arrives?